If I had walked past the cabin that morning, I would have made it out of the Appalachians without ever knowing how close I came to disappearing. But it stood there in plain sight, bathed in early daylight, solid and ordinary enough to convince me that stopping for a closer look was harmless. That mistake followed me long after I left the mountains, and it still hasn't let go. I was on my third day of a solo hike, moving at a steady pace, planning to cover around 11 miles before noon. The morning was cool, just under 50 degrees Fahrenheit, the forest still damp from the night. Sunlight filtered cleanly through the trees, and nothing about that day felt threatening. That's why the cabin caught my attention. It wasn't hidden or falling apart. It sat a few yards off the trail, solid and deliberate, like someone had built it to last generations. Wide porch, 2 windows on each side, a pitched roof that hadn't collapsed. This wasn't a hunter's shack, it was a family home. I stopped and listened. No voices, no movement, just birds and the distant rustle of leaves. Everything about the place said occupied, just not at this exact moment. The front door wasn't locked. Inside, the cabin opened into a large common room, easily 20 feet across. A long wooden table with 4 chairs, shelves lined with canned food, a stone fireplace big enough to heat the entire space. To one side, a narrow hallway led deeper inside. I glanced down it and saw 2 closed bedroom doors. This place wasn't meant for one person. The air smelled clean, no mildew, no rot. Someone had swept recently. A family photograph hung crooked on the wall, too far away to see details. Boots were lined neatly by the door, different sizes, adult and child. Every instinct told me to leave. Instead, I took a few more steps inside. I didn't touch anything. I didn't sit down. I just looked. That was when I noticed a shelf near the fireplace, cluttered with everyday items, a compass, spare batteries, a folding knife, and a thick photo album. It felt wrong the moment I picked it up. The first pages were ordinary. Black and white photographs of a family, a man and a woman, 2 boys. Most of the pictures were taken outdoors, almost all of them in the forest. Smiling faces, hunting trips, deer laid out carefully, rifles resting against shoulders. Then I turned the page. The animals were larger, the poses more intentional, the smiles sharper, almost forced. The forest behind them looked darker, closer, as if it were leaning in. I flipped another page. One of the men was holding a skull. Human. My hands went cold. I stared at it, waiting for my brain to correct the image. It didn't. The next photograph showed bones arranged neatly on a tree stump. Another showed 3 of them, standing together, one holding something small, unmistakably shaped like a hand. The rest of the album was worse. I snapped it shut, my heart hammering hard enough to make me lightheaded. For several seconds, I just stood there, staring at the floor, breathing too fast, trying to convince myself I hadn't seen what I knew I'd seen. That's when my eyes drifted toward the hallway. At the end of it stood a tall wardrobe, its door slightly open. I moved toward it without thinking, dread settling deep in my stomach. When I pulled it open, my breath caught. Inside was a pile of backpacks, dozens of them, different brands, different sizes, some old and sun-faded, some nearly new. Names were written on many of them in black marker, and on several, dark, dried stains soaked deep into the fabric. That was the moment it became clear. Whoever lived in this cabin hunted more than animals, and I was standing in their home. I didn't close the wardrobe gently. I didn't think. I didn't plan. The only clear thought in my head was that staying even one more second inside that cabin was a mistake I wouldn't survive. I grabbed my own backpack, the one I had left near the entrance. It felt heavier than it had a few minutes earlier. I didn't check what was inside. I slung it over one shoulder and moved toward the back door, slow at first, forcing myself not to make noise. Halfway across the room, something pulled my attention to the window. A man was walking toward the cabin. He was still about 40 yards out, emerging between the trees, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going. Tall, broad shoulders, a jacket the same dull color as the forest around him. He wasn't looking around. He was looking straight at the house, at me. The back door was on the opposite side of the cabin. If I was going to leave, it had to be now. I eased it open and slipped outside, keeping low, letting the structure block me from view. The ground was damp, soft under my boots, swallowing sound. For a split second, hope flared, the fragile kind that makes you reckless. Then I ran. I made it maybe 300 yards before the sound tore through the trees. A scream. Human. Raw. Furious. It didn't sound like pain. It sounded like a signal. I didn't look back. I pushed harder, lungs burning, branches snapping against my arms and face. Leaves whipped past my eyes. My pack bounced violently against my spine. Another scream echoed behind me. Then another, from a different direction. There wasn't just one of them. They were spreading out. The realization hit me with cold clarity. This wasn't a chase. It was a hunt. They weren't running blindly. They were driving me, steering me, forcing me downhill. Every time I veered, another voice cut me off, closer than before. My breathing turned ragged. My legs started to shake. I could hear footsteps now, heavy, deliberate, not panicked. They knew this terrain. I didn't. The forest thinned suddenly. There was no warning, no time to stop. The ground vanished beneath my feet. For a fraction of a second, my body didn't understand what was happening. Then gravity took over, and I was falling, branches tearing at me as the world spun sideways. I hit the river hard. The shock stole the air from my lungs. Ice-cold water crushed against my chest and dragged me under. I fought, kicking blindly, the current ripping the pack from my shoulder as it pulled me downstream. When I surfaced, gasping, I caught one last glimpse of the cliff above. 3 male silhouettes stood at the edge. They didn't shout. They didn't wave. They just watched. Then the current yanked me away, slamming me against rocks, spinning me end over end, carrying me miles downstream until my strength gave out and the river finally spit me onto the muddy bank. I lay there shaking, soaked, barely conscious, knowing only one thing for certain. I was alive, and that wasn't part of their plan. The river left me on a shallow bend miles downstream, coughing water and mud, my hands clawing at the bank until my fingers found dirt that held. I lay there for a long time, face pressed into wet leaves, chest burning, listening for voices that never came. My body shook uncontrollably. I didn't know how much time had passed, only that the light had shifted, the sun now low and slanted through the trees. When I finally stood, pain came in layers. My legs felt borrowed. My ribs ached with every breath. I checked myself without really looking. Blood on my forearms, torn sleeves, missing pack. It didn't matter. I was alive, and that fact felt temporary. I started walking. Not fast, not smart, just forward. I followed the river until it bent away, then cut through the forest, keeping the sound of water behind me like a false sense of safety. Fear did the walking for me. Every snapped twig made my shoulders jump. Every shadow looked tall enough to be a man. By the time I reached the ranger station, dusk had settled in. The building appeared suddenly between the trees. Fluorescent lights, a gravel lot, a flag hanging limp in the still air. I don't remember knocking. I remember faces turning toward me, hands grabbing my arms before my knees gave out. They listened, all of it. The cabin, the photographs, the backpacks, the man at the window, the screams, the silhouettes on the cliff. They wrote everything down, coordinates, time of day, direction of travel. One of them kept nodding, slow and tight, like he'd heard pieces of this before, but never all at once. They drove me home that night, told me I was lucky, told me they'd check the area first thing in the morning. I didn't sleep. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was one of the rangers. His voice was calm, professional, apologetic. They'd gone to the coordinates I gave them. They'd searched the trail, the surrounding ridges, the riverbank. They found no cabin, no foundation, no tracks, no recent fire pits, no signs of habitation at all. Just forest. He said maybe I'd been disoriented. Maybe the river had carried me farther than I realized. Maybe stress had filled in the gaps. He said these things gently, like he didn't want to offend me. I thanked him and hung up. I know what I saw. I know where I stood. And I know this. Somewhere in the Appalachians, there is a place that doesn't want to be found, and men who know exactly how to make sure it isn't. I've never gone back. Not because I'm afraid of the woods, but because I'm not sure they ever stopped looking for me.